You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody, that music means it is time once again for the Crypto Rundown, the program where we dive into the other side of the derivative spectrum, talk about Bitcoin options and futures and all the fun therein, some SPA as well as some of the altcoin as well, break down the volume, the vol, all the good stuff. My name is Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as, of course, from this fine network upon which many of you have been mainlining these days. Glad to see that. We know these are troubled times out there, so a lot of you want financial information. We're happy to bring it to you. Volume, volatility, all the good stuff we break down here on the network on a regular basis. Education, we got that in spades. Got what's trading, unusual activity, all that good stuff. Futures, options, shows for advisors like you were just hearing in the live chat, and a bunch of other fun things. So if you haven't upgraded to the full network, first off, head on out there and get going out there. I know a lot of you have. And also, B, if you like what you hear, make sure you leave reviews on your platform of choice. Could be wherever you listen to it. Could be iTunes. A lot of you like YouTube for this show, so head on out over there if you want to get it there and leave a review so other folks can continue to discover this program. Keep those questions coming, too. We do love to hear from you guys. Speaking of hearing from people, it's not just me on the old show. We got a great guest lined up. So without further ado, let's roll out the Crypto Hot Seat.
Forget about cold storage. It's time to turn up the heat on thought leaders from the world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time to take their place on the Crypto Hot Seat.
All right, like the man said, this is the Crypto Hot Seat, the portion of the show where we bring on guests from throughout the world of crypto derivatives and indeed beyond and proceed to pick their brains for the benefit of you, the listener. And today's guest is an old friend of the network, even though he hasn't been on a little bit. He's been busy working on some projects. We'll get to those. He is Simon Ho, the CEO of T3 Index, a.k.a. the Spike's father himself. Simon, welcome back to the Crypto Rundown program, sir.
Oh, thank you for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure.
All right, let's get right to it. You were last on a few months back on early May. Seems like an eternity now. So much happens week to week here on the show and indeed in the marketplace as a whole and in the world as a whole these days. Most of it, not the best, but c'est la vie. 2020, an interesting year so far. Let's just put it that way. You've always been working a lot of interesting stuff. In fact, last time you were on, you were talking about your BitVol index, which is, of course, a way to measure and track volatility in the Bitcoin space, effectively a Bitcoin VIX, for lack of a better term out there. Coming into showtime right now, that's hovering at about a 62.81 or so, it seems, which is frothy, but off the recent highs of the triple digits and certainly off the crazy madness we saw of nearly 200 back in mid-March of this year. So a lot to parse, but I know you've been busy on the Bitcoin volatility front since the last time we chatted, Simon, so catch us up. What are you working on over there these days?
Right, yeah. So I mentioned it first quite some time ago with you, and it's taken a bit of time to sort of get to this point. But so we've done a lot of we've made a lot of changes to the actual index itself. As you know, we created the Spikes Index, and inside the construction, there is a very robust proprietary sort of algorithm that helps to keep the index stable. That is kind of important, particularly in a market like this one, where it's dominated by a couple of data providers in terms of the people who have the option prices. And so therefore you need to make sure that you bring stability to it. So the price dragging has been working extremely well, even in those sort of high vol periods. The index has been pumping for almost about 2 years now, and people who want to get the full history, you'll be able to get that pretty soon. It's on Refinitiv, so if people actually have that platform and they want to have a look at the price in real time, then you can look that up on their platform. It is the ticker, I believe, is BTCVOL equals T3IN, so T3 index. So that's now pumping up and live. It's up 24/7, so it's kind of consistent with the rest of the market in crypto space. And frankly, there's a lot going on. So as you may know, we have been talking with LEDGERX as an exchange to list this product. We're also planning to and having discussions with other people in other jurisdictions to list it as well. And I think that's going to be self-reinforcing. In terms of the product itself, we're taking perhaps a little bit of a departure from the norm, but we're thinking of having the cycles aligned with VIX. Now, I think that could be a game changer in terms of liquidity, because you'll be able to get all sorts of interesting things like cross-margining, cross-asset trading, and that would make it much easier and more seamless to be able to trade a BitVol contract, futures contract, for example, versus a Spikes or a contract. So from that point of view, it's very, very exciting. So right now we have the index is a 30-day index. We're also in the middle of working on a 7-day index as well, which I think is popular, given that weekly options are very popular in the crypto space already. So that's kind of the high level of where we're at. And we're really excited to sort of actually finally sort of do something about this and actually get it up and running.
Yeah, you've been working on this one for some time. You've been talking about BitVol for some time, so I'm glad to see that it's finally taking the next steps, Simon, into becoming a real boy, into becoming a product you and I can all trade someday, sir.
Yes, exactly. That's the hope.
It makes sense that you guys would partner up with LEDGERX. We had them on this program not too long ago. We need to check in. I think there's been some changes over there since the last time we chatted with them, including, I believe, a new CEO. But it makes sense you guys would partner with them. They've been one of the leading players here on the U.S. side of trying to get the derivatives more active, and certainly on the Bitcoin volatility front as well. They were one of the earliest ones to create what they termed a Bitcoin VIX out there. In fact, I'm going to cheat. We have a listener question I was going to save for our question segment, but I'll bump that up as well since we're talking about all things LEDGERX right now. Let's see if I can find it. Here we go. This comes from Eldon. Eldon wants to know, what is the status of the Bitcoin Fear Index from LEDGERX? Is that still available? Like I mentioned early on this program, well over a year ago, LEDGERX kind of dove into that fray, trying to quantify Bitcoin volatility, and they were not shy about calling it the Bitcoin Fear Index. They were really trying to go after this VIX for Bitcoin moniker. It seems like that kind of waned, and now, of course, you're talking with them here, Simon, about bringing on the BitVol. So is it fair to say that BitVol is maybe the Bitcoin Fear Index for LEDGERX 2.0, sir? I
would say that's 100% accurate, yes. So, as you said, there's been some changes at LEDGERX, and it's onwards and upwards. We've developed a very good relationship with them, and we hope to be able to bring this to not only LEDGERX but other exchanges as well.
Yeah, we've had a few questions like this along the lines ever since they announced it. They announced it and made a lot of fanfare with it, and then we couldn't really find much more data on it. So I always kind of maybe assume maybe SIBO leaned on them a little bit for diving too heavily into that Bitcoin Fear Index branding. But either way, it sounds like this is going to be an interesting thing going forward. So right now, if I'm a LEDGERX, you said you can find that on Refinitiv. And also for LEDGERX users, can they log in and see this index over there as well, Simon?
So that will be there very shortly. Right now, it isn't. This is all relatively brand new. So the Refinitiv stream is only a few days old, so it took quite a while to sort of code it, but it's up and running. And LEDGERX will have it in short order.
I do like the plan to line up the expirations and the contract cycles with VIX, because obviously there's a long-standing volatility crowd there who's used to a certain cycle of volatility products. So lining up a Bitcoin vol product with that, it makes a certain amount of sense. Now, you know where I'm going to go next, Simon. Everyone likes a good abstract index. They like to have something they could analyze and use in their trading from an analysis perspective, but they really like something they could sink their teeth into and actually trade. I know we're not quite there yet, but give our listeners some insight into what you're thinking along those lines in terms of having a spot tradable, a future, and then hopefully someday an option on this, sir.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the plan. So the idea here is to try and recreate the ecosystem of spikes and VIX. So there are two existing volatility products out there, but they're both on the same asset class. So the real beauty about this is it's on a different asset class, but also one that deserves a volatility index, frankly. If you think about sort of the volatility of various asset classes around the world, you'll find that crypto is right up there. As you mentioned, back in March, the volatility, the vol index of the BitVol was up near 200%. So this is something that really could use a volatility derivative. People in the crypto space are very early adopters and eager to do stuff, and there isn't such a thing at the moment. So I think this is definitely a very interesting opportunity, and I think it's timely, and I think the market is maturing. If you have a look at the data from some of the biggest options exchanges, they're starting to trade some real volume these days, and that's really very supportive. If you don't have a liquid underlying, as in the options, then it's very difficult to make a volatility derivative. Right now, I think that the time has come for this. So that's why we wanted to do this now, and we want to start the process of putting this together so that we can actually trade it. So we talked earlier a little bit, just touched on some of the parameters of the index and potentially the derivatives. This will be a little bit out of step, I suppose, but nothing sort of untoward or something that would hamper the product. Where we're going to do it at 9:30. Normally, options settle at, I think it's 8 a.m. UTC. So the US is still pretty much asleep. So having this on a US regulated exchange is a huge bonus as well, and it's got its own clearinghouse. I mean, there's a lot to like about this setup. So yeah, we're really excited, but certainly products are the ultimate goal. And so, as I said, we're looking to have 7-day index as well as the 30-day, which we have right now, and there'll be definitely listing of futures and options on those futures at some point.
Seems like you're stuck in the approval phase for a couple of things. You're still waiting, of course, for Spikes futures to get backlisted as well. You're ahead of your time here, Simon, with products, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, a source of much frustration, but we'll get there. We're really close, and LEDGERX has a great relationship with the CFTC. So if they decide when they decide to go ahead, I'm sure that will be a fairly efficient process.
We'll get to it a little bit more in more detail in a little bit in the Bitcoin breakdown. But of course, vol, as you mentioned, has kind of come in a little bit on the Bitcoin front. It's obviously still a very volatile asset, the BitVol hovering around a 62, almost 63. So that compares to a lot of other products. WTI, which is getting a lot of headlines these days, that's only about a 17 vol. So obviously a lot more volatile than those, but still it has come off those peaks of around 200 of not too long ago. Have you seen any waning of interest in Bitcoin volatility? Has the vol itself has waned, or are people still really excited about this and kind of living in that post-March wake of all the madness we saw from a vol perspective not too long ago, Simon?
I think the latter. I think there's still, as you say, bathing in the wake of that. And frankly, as I said, you're seeing options volumes go up. I mean, CME is probably the most recent news grabber insofar as you have people like Paul Tudor Jones moving his activity to the CME. Obviously, you've got OKX doing well. Deribit is the leader clearly, and LEDGERX making a push as well. So it's definitely it's a good time to be involved in this particular market. I think it hasn't. There's a lot of stuff going on and some new things as well.
Yeah, you're right. The volume on CME has been kicking up quite a bit of late as well. Since we're talking about Bitcoin option volume, let's get to it then with a little bit of the old Bitcoin breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trading activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the show where we do exactly that. We break down the price action, the volatility, the volume, all that fun stuff, and the world's leading digital asset. Of course, we're talking about Bitcoin. It's been kind of a nothing week. You know, we are outside of the other things that are happening in 2020, pandemic, macro issues, global tensions, all these other fun things, civil unrest here in the U.S., all these other fun things that are happening. Outside of all that, this is typically a seasonally very quiet period for the markets and for most assets as a result. You don't see a lot of volume. You don't see a lot of volatility usually heading into August. This is usually just a quiet time for the market, and we're seeing that playing out a little bit right now in Bitcoin. It's kind of just hovering. It's down about 20 and a half handles from our last show. Coming into show times at about a 93.05. At the end of our last show was about 326 and change, or so 93.26 out there. So not a lot going on from an overall movement perspective, and that's being reflected here in the volatility stats. All this data, of course, coming from our friends over there at SKEW Land. Check them out, SKEW.com, to learn more. 30-day realized, which is, of course, the actual volatility that's been exhibited in the marketplace. Listeners, down a little bit, down to about 30%. It was 35% on our last show. And more interestingly, a few weeks ago, it was about 52%. So we did see a lot more realized volatility a few weeks ago than we are seeing right now. 1 year realized, pretty much not going to change too much, and it hasn't changed too much this week. It's up down to about 81% from 84%. The implied volatility, 30-day implied, which is where the options are actually pricing the volatility. If you're going to go out and buy Bitcoin option right now, that's the level of volatility you're going to pay, or somewhere around that, depending on where you're trading, obviously. That's up a little bit. It's up to about 54% from 52%. So realized trending down, implied trending up, but ever so slightly out there. Before I get to the volume, obviously, Simon, you're out there watching the Bitcoin volatility quite a bit. It's kind of in your blood over there these days. Aside from the general downtrend we've seen out there, anything else catching your eye from an overall Bitcoin volatility perspective these days, sir?
Not really. I mean, the charts are pretty wonderful if you ever look, as we said, from the March period in particular. So I think it's unlikely for us to get anywhere near there again anytime soon. It is a market that is sort of prone to sort of bouts of extreme volatility, though, so it certainly will happen again, I'm sure of it. But right now, it just seems like it's people are settling across the markets, right? Isn't it? I mean, whether you look at the spikes or VIX or the volatility of other asset classes, it seems that right now that people are sort of taking stock, checking out how this second wave is going to go. Is it going to be for real? And is it going to mean another downturn and so on? So it's interesting. Mike Novogratz, who runs Galaxy Digital, I saw a comment from him recently talking about the fact that, stock markets in particular, were insane at these sorts of levels. So, maybe given the pullback in volatility in BitVol and or the other volatility indices, it may be interesting. It may be an interesting time to sort of start thinking about accumulating some volatility on the option side.
Yeah, you alluded to this earlier in the crypto hot seat there, Simon, but when you first approached us with this BitVol, you were trying to put it together and piece it from the OTC prints that the Kuna guys were putting up, and that's obviously a challenge from an overall just liquidity perspective and getting enough data to go out there and be able to generate an index on a real-time basis. Obviously, the market has evolved quite a bit since you first approached us with this idea, and now we have Deribit. We're going to get to in a little bit, doing a lot of paper, even CME coming online. How much easier is your life these days, Simon, than when you were first dreaming up this BitVol not too long ago, sir?
Yeah, a lot, and it's great progress, frankly, for the industry. I think it's really important, and so the quality of the data has certainly improved. The number of people who can provide it has also improved. So there's also this arrangement with Blockstream and the ICE with a lot of crypto data. But yeah, it's much better. As you said, when we were first looking at it, it was extremely difficult to get good information. Whereas now I would say that's definitely changed. Still doesn't compare to sort of the major markets, but I mean, we're still in our infancy here, so that's not a surprise, but certainly high quality enough to be able to do these sorts of things.
Yeah, there's certainly enough flow to be able to disseminate an index or two off of this. Let's break down some of that flow. Let's start in Deribit land. Still the leading venue out there from an overall Bitcoin options perspective. A decent volume week. I wouldn't say it's a blow your doors off week, but a pretty decent volume week. The big day over the past week was our last show day, July 6th, with 133 million worth of notional on the tape. Other big days are about 97 million on the 10th out there. We saw a few days around that level. So a decent week, all things considered, especially given where we are from a seasonality perspective, but not blowing the doors off out here otherwise. Let's see what the big prints were over this past week. These actually came on the 8th over there on Deribit. Looks like a lot of puts, like a little put strip. The 8,000 puts going up in blocks of 230 and 270. So obviously 500 net total. The 8,500 puts also doing similar block size. So we like to look at 500 lots. Seems to be a good round number, and those two obviously adding up to 500 here. This is going up on the 8th. So when Bitcoin was 94.27, they went up for 0.0159 Bitcoin up here on the 8,500 puts and 0.0101 Bitcoin on the 8,000 puts. I'll leave you guys to do the math out there. But other than that, not a huge amount of large prints out here this week. The big prints today, I'll put that in air quotes out here, the big prints today over there on Deribit are on the call side. 11,500 calls doing about 885 contracts, and then the 10,000 calls following at a distant number 2 out there. Speaking of light volume, we were just talking about CME. CME has been coming on strong of late. This week, not so much. Again, we're coming off the holiday week here in the U.S., so probably some of that impacting. Because overall volume was fairly anemic on the options front this week. We didn't see some of the big verticals that we saw going up out there in July and other months of late. Maybe Paul Tudor-Jones taking a bit of a break out there. Whoever it was doing those verticals out there. Not so much on the tape up there on CME land this past week. We're getting down to the SKEW perspective. SKEW's coming down a little bit as well. It was 13% on the positive side a few weeks ago. Last week it was 3.2%. This week it's almost pretty much even. It's at 0.4%, so not showing a market bias to the calls or the puts out there right now, which again makes some sense given the fact that we're seeing a little bit of a languishing here from an underlying and from a volatility perspective. Call to put, similar numbers out there. It's pretty much a coin flip, 52%, ever so slightly in favor of the calls, but there's no real bias out there as well. Let's dive into the OI a little bit, see if there's any interesting changes afoot out there. Remember, June was the big month total across all the different platforms and venues out there. We saw net open interest topping the 1.8 billion, almost 1.9 billion total notional value out there. Obviously, we're nowhere near that again. Obviously, once June came off the board, a lot of that OI went with it, but we're getting back up there again. Looking at all the venues added together, it's at about 1.3 or so billion, so we're getting there again. Deribit's closing in on $1 billion again, about 958 million. Like I mentioned, CME kind of languishing, but still in the number 2 spot, 159 million out there. Then we've got OKEX still clinging on to the number 3, 57 million. LEDGERX number 4, 40 million. Maybe that'll change once the BitVol starts trading out there, and BAKKT bringing up the rear with that. Still 65,000 they've had from the beginning. They had a couple of trades on that first day, and that was kind of it. Looking at the overall venues, breaking down the OI, CME has skyrocketed up to a pretty strong percentage. It's coming back down now, down to about 13%. Deribit's right about almost 80%, 79%. And we're seeing OKEX at 5%, LEDGERX at about 4%. If you're looking where the action is across the months, we got to go out to July. That's the big dog right now. Nearly 50,000 contracts open out there. But like I said, September is going to overtake that pretty soon, probably. People like their quarterlies in Bitcoin options. I don't know. Is that something you've noticed as well, Simon? We've watched that a lot here on the show. It seems like whenever we're parsing the various open interest from a Bitcoin options perspective, it almost always aggregates in the quarterlies. We just saw June come off the board. A ton of OI came with it. March was huge. September is probably going to be big. Have you noticed that as well out there, Simon, that the Bitcoin OI tends to aggregate around the quarterlies? And if so, why do you think that is, sir?
Yeah, that's a good point. So yes, I have sort of been cognizant of that. I mean, I don't pretend to be the world's expert on why that is, but certainly I think it kind of makes sense. I mean, if you've got this is still a relatively new product, and it's making its way. Clearly, Deribit is the leader here, so they probably see more of it. But I think it would make sense because you want liquidity to in specific pools. So if this is a relatively new product, you want to be able to have the comfort to get in and out easily if you so choose. And so that's best done by focusing in on those contracts that are the most liquid. So I think that's a natural thing. And as liquidity improves, and not only on those exchanges but more broadly, I think you're going to find that people will be more accepting of doing monthlies and more weeklies and so on. Not that they don't do them already, but yes, I can understand why people want to kind of shelter a little bit in those pockets of high volatility. It makes sense to me.
I don't know, at the start of the show, Simon, before you came on, we billed you as the world's foremost expert in how the liquidity aggregates across the months in Bitcoin options. Are you saying we misled the people, sir? You're not bringing that to us today. So we'll have to change your billing here. Maybe reconsider future appearances here on the program.
Yeah, sure.
You know, it is just fascinating to watch how these products evolve. And you're right, it still is early days for a product like this. And so maybe that lines up with some ways other people like to hedge. Maybe it lines up with how their futures or spot position is unfolding. Either way, still the case. Right now, July leading the dance, but obviously July is going to come off the board here pretty soon. So a very near-term blip here. Then we'll probably see most of that pile into September. And then beyond that, DEES already coming on the board with about 12,000 contracts open. September, number 2, with about 26,500. So interesting stuff. If you have thoughts about why liquidity tends to aggregate in those months, hit us up, let us know. Looking at where people are playing right now from a strike perspective, it's still the 11,000 strike, which is still surprising to me. You'd think where we are right now, hovering just shy of the 10,000 level, failing to make it time and again. You think 10,000 would be in the driver's seat, yet that is not the case. It is the 11,000 strike with nearly 16,000 contracts open. The 10,000 strike only has a little bit shy of 11,000, about 10,700, about exactly 5,000 contracts fewer. So for whatever reason, some people have decided to play on that 11,000 strike, and that's where they're coming for size. Then beyond that, we have to go all the way down to 8,000 with about 8,100 contracts. So 8,000 contracts open on the 8,000 strike. How appropriate out there. Getting out to the futures land out there. Light volume for the options on CME. It stands to reason to be a light week for the futures. And that's pretty much what we saw today. Coming into showtime, there were about 2,500 contracts on the tape. Remember, that's a 5X contract, so it's a little bit more going on there from a notional perspective, but still, overall, not a lot of contract volume. Last week, the big day was Monday with about 7,400. Every other day of the week was pretty light out there. Similar story on the BAKKT side. Check out our old friend, the BAKKT volume bot. It doesn't have a lot of work to do these days, not a ton of paper going up on the BAKKT side of the space as well. 1,928 contracts as of this last report, which was down about 15%. Their open interest was at about 7.4 million. That's down about 12% out there. All right, let's keep on rolling. It's time to parse some of the fun out there in the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody, welcome to the altcoin universe, a portion of the show where we parse everything going on outside of Bitcoin. But before we get to all that in a second, I'm curious, Mr. Simon, I know you like to keep an eye on all things crypto, vol. Are there any other altcoin out there that are catching your eye from a vol perspective, or are you solely focused on Bitcoin these days, sir?
Yeah, look, I'm focused on Bitcoin and Ethereum, so we've got an Ethereum index as well that's sort of in the works. But yes, unfortunately, I'm not that familiar with the ones that are further down the chain.
Nobody is. That's part of the fun. That's why we like diving into. Everyone comes on here with some esoteric altcoin that we've never heard about before. In fact, we have another one here today. But let's get to the top 10 first. You mentioned ETH. ETH, obviously the other big dog in the overall altcoin universe. Top 10 here from a market cap perspective. Remember, take these top 10s with a big grain of salt in terms of the market cap. But again, the rankings, I think, have some value to them. Number 10, Crypto.com coin. Say that 5 times fast. About $2.6 billion. Number 9, Litecoin has fallen quite a bit. It was a top 5er not too long ago. $2.9 billion out there. Number 8, Binance Coin, a little bit north of $2.9 billion, so just edging out Litecoin. Number 7, Bitcoin SV, 3.3, almost $3.4 billion. Cardano also at about $3.4 billion, but enough for the number 6 spot. Number 5, Bitcoin Cash, $4.3 billion. Number 4, XRP, shy of the $9 billion level now, $8.9 billion. Number 3, Tether, $9.2 billion. Number 2, of course, ETH, $27 billion, almost even. And number 1 with the bullet, Bitcoin at about $171 billion. Worth noting, altcoin has been resurging. We talked about ETH. We'll get to that in a little bit. That one's been moving up of late. Not so much this week, but in the past it has. And it has generally lifted the altcoin tide out there. In fact, over the past week, we saw the dominance rate for Bitcoin fall from about 64.15% to about 62.5%. Of course, that shows that altcoin increasing in overall market cap against Bitcoin out there. Some folks even looking out there to maybe see what they're terming an altcoin season for 2020. Maybe this is the year of the altcoin. Some folks have been wondering for a while, when are altcoin going to get out from under the shadow of their big daddy, the big brother there, Bitcoin? maybe 2020 is the year. If you're an altcoin fan, perhaps this is the one for you out here this year. Let's see what's going on. Let's start with ETH. Like we mentioned, ETH has been on a good run of late, taking a bit of a break this week, down about 3.5 handles from our last show out there. But again, that's really kind of driven a lot of action over the last few weeks out here in altcoin land. So a lot of folks have been looking to ETH. Let's break down some ETH metrics ourselves. ETH 30-day realized is unched. It's at about 46%. But remember, a few weeks ago, that was 66%. So ETH was exhibiting a lot more realized vol a few weeks ago than it is right now. 1 year realized, pretty much unched down ever so slightly. Still at about 100%. It's a pretty volatile year for any asset class. The 30-day imply, which again is the level that vol is being priced in to these options over there on the ETH side, it's up to about 57% from 53%. So kind of a similar pattern to what we're seeing in Bitcoin vol. Realized unched to down slightly and the implied up ever so slightly. Simon, any interesting nuggets you're finding out there as you're calculating the ETH vol index these days? So any surprises you found out there?
Well, I'm relatively new to the space. One thing that I've been surprised about is just how closely aligned both of those two coins are. Frankly, the vol on them is largely indistinguishable. So that was quite an interesting find. I thought they may be slightly more divergent than they are, but no.
Yeah, that has been an interesting nugget. I know when ETH fell below Bitcoin, it was a surprise for a lot of people from a vol perspective anyway out here. And so far, at least these days, they're kind of hovering at similar levels. So from a vol perspective, a bit of a coin flip as to which coin you want to pick up out there right now. Let's look at the overall volume. ADV kind of unched from our last show right around pretty close to 9 million. Again, this is notional now. Listeners, a decent volume today, 14 million on the tape coming into Showtime today over there on Deribit, and also on the 10th they also did 14 million. So those are the two big volume spikes. So it's like today's got some decent paper, even though ETH not moving a ton out there right now. OI also seeing similar increases. Remember, they've all fell off a cliff after June expiration. They're slowly fighting their way back. OI is up to about 152 million out there right now. That's across all the platforms, which is really only two when it comes to ETH. It's 90% Deribit and then a little bit of OKEX out there. OI last week was 131 million, so we're getting back up there. Topped out not quite at 180 million. It's like 170 odd million worth of notional OI back at the height in June. So not quite there yet from an overall ETH OI perspective, but getting pretty strong, getting up there. Again, our friends over there at Genesis Vol have been keeping an eye on this in their newsletter out here, and they mentioned going back a week or so out there in the newsletter that the monster expiration, again referring to all that flow coming on all that paper coming off the tape after June, they think ETH's back on track, ETH OI back on track to make new all-time highs. So they think we'll be back at those levels that we saw back in June not too long ago. They think it's positioning around the new ETH 2.0 that's driving all this action out there, which certainly can be out there. They also noted earlier this month they saw a lot of action in AUG and huge sales in the 200 and 220 puts in early July and late June, 16,000 net. So again, not so much in terms of the bearish flow out there. So ETH's been lighting it up quite a bit out here of late, and if you believe the Genesis guys, we'll be seeing those new OI records any day now out here, which certainly would be interesting. Ripple up ever so slightly from our last show coming into Showtime. We saw a good old XRP north of the 20 cent level again. So that's a pretty important psychological barometer out there. A lot of you keep watching Ripple to see if it's going to stay above 20. Is it going to threaten well below it? It's been languishing well below it for some time now, but back up 20.2 cents coming into Showtime. So all you XRP bulls out there, that's certainly perhaps a breath of fresh air for you guys. A Bitcoin Cash not feeling the love, down about 6 handles, and Bitcoin SV down about 10.5 handles from last show. And that's not enough altcoin for you. Everyone's all fired up about this CHAINLINK out here these days, which is the ticker, of course, Link. That one's on the rampage these days, up 39.5%, hitting a new all-time high. So if you're surfing all the different crypto sites, you're seeing all this frenzy about Link. That's probably why. New all-time high and a market cap of $2.5 billion. That puts it right outside the top 10, right below that Crypto.com coin, which is at about $2.6 billion. So who knows? Maybe this time next week, if this rampage continues, this rally continues, we'll be talking about this CHAINLINK in the top 10 out there this week. People are saying it's in the price discovery mode, which leads to new people coming in and buying it up. Price discovery meaning a little bit different in the crypto space than it does out there in the old options market making world out there. Its previous high was 531. It blew through that back about a week ago here, exactly on the show time. So folks are getting excited about that out there. Trading volume also hitting levels not seen for quite some time, not since the big annihilation of Bitcoin back in April of this year. So I guess they have a lot of collaborations on the forefront here. So folks are excited about that. Google also apparently touting them in a recent blog post. So a lot of folks in the crypto space and in the altcoin space getting fired up about Chainlink. Who knows? Maybe that'll make it onto our list next week. And maybe someday soon we'll be talking about options on that front as well. But now it's time to talk about what you guys have on the brain. It is time for your crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, everybody, welcome to the crypto questions. We already cheated. We had that listener question from Eldon at the top of the show about LEDGERX vol out there. Let's keep that coming. A lot of you like the show on YouTube. It does seem like there's a huge cross-correlation of the audience for the Crypto Rundown and YouTube. And a lot of our people are starting to enjoy our programs on YouTube, but for whatever reason, a lot of the comments, the feedback we get for this show comes via YouTube. Keep it coming. If you like it over there, we have added playlists and things to make it a little bit easier for you guys to consume the content over there. So if you like to enjoy your podcast via YouTube, have at it. We don't judge out there. Just keep your questions and comments coming. We do love to hear from you guys. Like this guy, Block Miner. He wants to know, he's chiming in on our episode 62, which was Just the Facts. He says, hey, have you guys looked into the WIN token yet? He says it's one of the only real innovations in the space. It works like shares in a casino. Thousands of daily players play on their casino called Wink, and 70% of that revenue goes into the reward pool that is equally split up among the WIN token holders. It's been around for almost 3 years, and they paid out over $2 billion in these tokens to their holders. They say it trades on Binance and a bunch of other major exchanges. Well, Block Miner, I have to say the WIN token is not on my list, but that's kind of part of the fun of doing this show, is that we get to hear about all these fun altcoin that you guys chime in on us. We've had some other gaming-oriented type utility tokens out there. Sounds like the Wink coin, which is the ticker symbol WIN, obviously, is in that same space. As of right now, listeners, it's had a little bit of an off day. It's at 0.000076. So it's off a wee bit out there right now. Not exactly the biggest name out there, but again, it's an interesting one. So perhaps if you're intrigued out there, listeners, give it a check. Let's see at the chart here. It looks like it peaked back in September of last year at 0.0003 USD out there. So has fallen a bit off those highs. Simon, is this going to be the next BitVol index? Are we looking at the WinVol index next, sir? Is that on your radar?
I have to get one up and running for real first before I go doing that. So I highly doubt that, unfortunately.
So unfortunately, Block Miner, there will be no WinVol index in the near future. But maybe, who knows? This thing keeps growing out here. We like all these different utility tokens out there. They have interesting value, and they're very different from a traditional trading asset that just moves solely based upon its value. Obviously, the utility token has a core utility, a core purpose to it, and so that makes it a little bit more intriguing. And then the value of that purpose, the value of that utility, is what drives the coin's value, which is, again, something interesting. You don't see that out there. People out there buying Apple over 400 now and things like that. They don't get into the utility of it. They just get into the net value of it. So a little bit different perspective out here in the crypto space, which is kind of fun. Another comment coming in from Logan over here on YouTube. He just says on our episode 59, the great halving, that was our episode. We talked obviously about the big Bitcoin halving out there. He just says he loved it. Well, thank you, Logan. We love you guys too. We love all of you out there who stream, who download, who chime in on our shows, who leave questions, who leave comments. Remember, if you like what you hear, keep those questions and comments coming. Keep those reviews coming on those platforms of choice too. It really does help new folks continue to discover the program. We see the numbers, see the folks coming in. If you're just enjoying the Crypto Rundown, there certainly is a very new and different audience for this program. Make sure if you haven't done so already, head on over and discover the full network. There's a whole bunch of great shows, about a dozen of them that you're missing. Volatility Views, which Simon has been on once or twice. The Option Block, the Options News Rundown, which is coming back hopefully these days kind of soon. We've got all sorts of fun stuff. The advisor's option, This Week in Futures options, you name it. Options Playbook Radio, Options Bootcamp, all sorts of fun stuff. So if you're a little intimidated even about the world of options, maybe all this information is a little bit confusing to you. You don't know what we mean when we're talking about SKEW or implied volatility or all these things, check out our Options Bootcamp program, Options Playbook Radio. It'll get you from 0 to 60, nice and easy, on your own schedule, at your own time. And it's completely free. You can't beat the price. All right, everybody. Unfortunately, that music means we've come to the end of another journey through the world of all things crypto, derivatives, and volatility and volume, all that fun stuff. I want to thank our buddy here, Mr. Simon Ho, the Spike's father, for joining us this week on the show. Simon, if folks are intrigued, they want to learn more about BitVol or about the ETH index, or maybe they want to go milkshake or spikes, where should they go? What should they do, sir?
Well, thank you for having me. So if people want to look at any of the indices that we have, you can go to t3index.com. We've got a whole bunch of things. As Mark said, we've got everything from the milkshake through to spikes and to the BitVol index. So please take a look and hit me up if you've got any questions.
There we go. And we'll look forward to seeing these become big boy products really soon, Simon, and start hopefully be able to trade a BitVol sometime. Who knows? Maybe even in 2020. How does that sound, Simon?
I'm all for it. We'll be working hard to make sure that happens.
So we'll look forward to that. We'll have to get the folks from LEDGERX back on again as well to check in with them and see how things are going and what they have to offer on the volatility front, because it sounds like they're adding some interesting new things over there. And on behalf of Simon and indeed myself, I want to thank all of you out there for downloading, for streaming, for subscribing, for sending in those questions. Keep them coming, for keeping those reviews coming too. We love all of those. And we'll see you back here throughout the week on the network. This show is hitting us every day, pretty much a couple times a day out here, some days, listeners. So if you haven't subscribed to the full network, you're missing out. And then we'll see you back here on Monday for more of the Crypto Rundown.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.